What would you do if your daughter tried to bury your truth with a book deal? Thomas Markle has had enough. After years of being labeled, silenced, and cast as the villain in Meghan Markle's rise to global royalty, he's breaking the seal. And not with a whisper. With fire. With names. With documents. Because this time, it's personal. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It started with a phone call. One Thomas says he'll never forget. He was at home, recovering from a health scare, when the line rang. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him to answer. What followed, he says, chilled him to the bone. Prince Harry, once the charming young man who had promised to take care of his daughter, was now threatening him with something far more dangerous than silence, a new memoir. A memoir that, according to Thomas, would finish the job. A job that began when Meghan stepped into the royal spotlight, leaving behind her humble roots, her family, and according to Thomas, the truth. But here's where things take a darker turn. Thomas didn't stay silent this time. No, he reached for an old folder he had kept in a locked drawer. Inside were photos, bank records, letters, pieces of a story that had never been told. Not out of shame, but out of love. Until now. He says Meghan has always known how to clean up her image. But cleaning up a reputation is one thing. Cleaning up money? That's a whole different operation. Thomas alleges that Meghan used her rise in fame not just to reinvent herself, but to quietly erase parts of her past, including questionable transactions, PR manipulation, and even anonymous offshore accounts tied to foundations no one can seem to trace today. You heard that right. This isn't just about a bitter dad lashing out. This is about laundering, image, narrative, and maybe something more. Something financial. Something potentially criminal. And Thomas claims he has the receipts. But let's pause. Why now? Why has Thomas held on to this for so long? Only to release it now. Just as rumors swirl that Prince Harry is preparing a second memoir, one insiders say will be unfiltered, unforgiving, and final. Because, according to Thomas, Meghan is scared. And fear makes people desperate. Desperate enough to silence the only man who still knows where the bodies are buried. Figuratively, of course. Or is it? Let's not forget the timing. Meghan's public image is wobbling. Netflix is hesitant. Spotify walked away. The British press is emboldened. Even some of her past allies are going quiet. So, if this new memoir really is her last play, Thomas Markle says he's not going down without exposing what he's kept hidden for years. The man who walked her down the aisle in spirit, but was left out in reality, is ready to walk us through a version of Meghan no one wants you to hear. How far would you go to protect your truth? If the people threatening it wore crowns and smiled for the cameras. Thomas Markle didn't expect to hear Harry's voice again. Not after years of silence. Not after being iced out of his daughter's life like yesterday's trash. But the voice on the line was unmistakable. Polite. Almost eerily calm. That's what caught him off guard. Thomas, the voice said. We've heard some things. We think it's time you stop talking. There wasn't a scream. There wasn't a fight. Just calculated pressure. And then the line that still makes Thomas's stomach turn. You're not safe in the next book. Let that sink in. Prince Harry, once the smiling son-in-law who sent him notes after Meghan's engagement, was now coldly warning him about a memoir. A published, global story. One where, Thomas assumed, he'd be painted as the villain. Again. But this time, it wouldn't be edited for kindness. No flattering shadows. No pulled punches. Now, Thomas knew Harry and Meghan were capable of rewriting history. He watched it happen during the Oprah interview. Saw himself reduced to a headline. A failed father. A betrayal. But this was different. This was revenge, bound in hardcover. So why now? Because Thomas had been asking questions. Loud ones. About where the money from Meghan's abandoned charities had gone. About the real purpose behind her flurry of LLC's post-royal exit. And according to him, Meghan didn't like that. Not one bit. She wants me erased, he said, so she can rewrite who she is without the people who knew her before the palace. And let's be honest, if you had something to hide, wouldn't a polished royal memoir be the perfect weapon? But here's where it gets even more chilling. Thomas says Meghan didn't just use Harry as her shield, she used him as her sword. Every time things got too close to the truth, Harry would step in, just like now. Threats masked as warnings. Silence disguised as protection. And this time, Thomas wasn't going to play along. So what did he do? He opened the drawer, the one he promised himself he'd never touch. Inside were records, letters, screenshots, a stack of papers that told a story Meghan hoped no one would ever hear. But what was inside that folder wasn't just about family betrayal. It was about laundering, legacy, and lies. And the first piece? A transaction, a trail, a name. What Thomas found cracked everything wide open. What if the image the world adored was paid for, scrubbed clean by money that's never been accounted for? That's the question Thomas Markle is now asking out loud. And according to him, the answer is more disturbing than anyone expected. After that chilling call from Harry, Thomas didn't just feel threatened, he felt ignited. And so, he did what he says Meghan never expected. He started digging. Not out of revenge, he claims, but out of principle, out of desperation, out of a desire to tell the story the palace press offices and Netflix contracts wouldn't touch. And what he says he found begins with a wire transfer, a six-figure donation, supposedly to a now-defunct women's empowerment initiative that Meghan championed right after her royal exit. Publicly, the foundation was hailed as transformative. Behind the scenes, it quietly folded within 6 months. No press release, no final report, just silence. Thomas got curious. The money, according to him, didn't disappear, it moved. Through a string of shell companies, LLCs, and consulting firms tied to names that didn't quite match. A cousin here, a college roommate there. Some addresses went back to Meghan's old Toronto circle. Others traced to tax havens. Coincidence? Thomas doesn't think so. He remembers a very different Meghan. The struggling actress clipping coupons, paying rent late, calling him when her car broke down. He says the woman he sees now, the one in Valentino and Cartier, speaking about climate change on private jets, has carefully hidden the financial scaffolding holding her new persona up. You can't go from frozen dinners to private chefs overnight without someone moving money, Thomas says. And then, there's the photos. Dr. DeVint shots. Public appearances that never actually happened. Press releases written before the supposed events. Thomas claims Meghan created phantom philanthropy, projects designed to look good on paper, while quietly padding her image and funding her next rebrand. It's image laundering, he says. Not unlike money laundering. Only harder to trace and easier to sell to the public. Because who questions a duchess saving the world? Here's the twist. Thomas says he tried to warn Harry. Once. Just after the wedding. He claims he wrote a personal letter, asking Harry to look closer. But it was returned. Unopened. A line scribbled across the envelope. Returned to sender. That was the last time he tried to speak with his daughter's husband. Until now. Because this time, Thomas isn't just holding documents. He's holding a letter. A letter that he says proves Meghan knew where the money was going, and who was helping her move it. And she signed it. With her real name. But what that letter actually says will turn everything upside down. Could one signature be the crack in the royal dam? Thomas Markle says yes. Because he kept it. A letter Meghan never thought he would dare reveal. A letter that, according to him, was written during one of the most turbulent periods in her post-royal rebrand. And it may finally expose what he calls the machine behind her global transformation. Here's what happened. Back in 2020, while the world was locked down and headlines swirled about Megxit, Meghan was busy. Behind the scenes, Thomas claims, she was orchestrating something much bigger than a clean break from the palace. She was building an empire and, allegedly, recruiting the players to help shape it. The letter, dated, signed, and allegedly authenticated by a third-party source Thomas refuses to name, was addressed to a Hollywood PR power broker with connections to crisis management teams, political consultants, and overseas image firms. In it, Meghan allegedly thanks the recipient for managing the transition from royal duchess to global voice. She discusses talking points, press suppression strategies, and one chilling phrase Thomas keeps repeating in disbelief. Project Clear Veil must remain off-record. Our connections are vulnerable if exposed. Clear Veil. Two words that don't show up anywhere in Meghan's public branding, charity work, or corporate filings. But Thomas insists it's real. He says it was a behind-the-scenes initiative designed to clean up not just press coverage, but the past itself. Old interviews disappeared. Photos vanished. Names erased. Financial records? Purged, redirected, or never filed. He pulls out a second page. Handwritten notes. Mentions of offshore foundations, shell entities, and a bold scribble at the bottom. Secure accounts before Netflix pitch. Now let's pause. If this letter is real, it's not just a peek into private strategy. It's leverage. Proof, Thomas says, that Meghan was never simply finding her voice, but strategically burying the people who knew her before she became a duchess. And he claims it's not just about image anymore. It's about control, legacy, and fear. Because if this letter goes public, Thomas believes it could spark legal questions, reopen dormant investigations, and force powerful allies to distance themselves. Fast. But here's the most haunting part. He says Meghan didn't just sign it. She wrote a postscript. Should this surface, discredit the source. Leak something about him. Make it go away. That source? Thomas Markle. And now, he's done being erased. Because what he reveals next may not only shatter the Sussex brand. It might drag others down with it. Names, dates, and one video Meghan never wanted the world to see. What happens when a father who's been pushed to the shadows finally steps into the spotlight, not to seek sympathy, but to expose a system built on silence? That's the question Thomas Markle has just answered. Loudly. From the threatening phone call that reignited an old wound, to the allegations of financial manipulation hidden beneath glamorous headlines. To the letter that reads less like a thank you note and more like the blueprint of a manufactured persona, we are now staring into the eye of a storm that's been brewing for years. And at the center of it is family. It's easy to write off Thomas Markle. Many have. A tabloid character. A man clutching at relevance. That's how Meghan's defenders frame him. But let's ask the hard question. What if he's telling the truth? What if he was never irrelevant, just inconvenient? What if the real story isn't about a bitter father, but a woman who built her brand on escape, edited her history, and silenced everyone who saw her before the crown? Thomas says he didn't come forward for revenge. He came forward because he was cornered. Because Harry's alleged threat pushed him too far. Because the people with the power to rewrite history had finally pushed their last pawn off the board. And that pawn decided to speak. So where does that leave us? With more questions than answers. What is Project Clearveil? Why is it absent from every public document Meghan's team has ever filed? Who were the consultants allegedly moving money? Were they connected to royal funds? Netflix advances? Foreign accounts? And most importantly, who else knew? Because if Meghan wasn't acting alone, if there were powerful allies enabling this behind the scenes, then we may be looking at the surface of something far larger than a family feud. And Thomas Markle? He says he's not done. He claims he still has one more recording. One final piece that ties this all together. The missing link between Meghan's sudden global reinvention and the dark, quiet players who made it possible. But he won't release it. Not yet. I'm giving her one chance, he said in a recent off-camera moment. One chance to tell the truth. Not to me. To the world. Whether that ever happens remains to be seen. But here's what we do know. The fairy tale is cracking. And behind the scenes, where the cameras don't roll and the publicists don't spin, a different Meghan may be waiting to be revealed. So now we ask you, who do you believe? Was Thomas Markle silenced, or just seeking the spotlight? Is Meghan a survivor of royal cruelty, or the architect of her own empire built on revision? And if the final tape drops, will anyone be left standing? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This story is far from over. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what's coming next could blow this entire saga wide open.